As we're wrapping up this semester, I wanted to be extra thorough and cover all of the designs that we have before us. And as I was looking through your book, I realized that I didn't go as much into detail about single case designs. And I wanted to bring this up because it is something that we see sometimes. In fact, I use a single case design for my health psychology class. So I did want to introduce you to this concept just so you could think about it a little bit more as it relates to more complex designs. So a single case design is where you have a single participant, and you might be interested in exploring, for example, the effectiveness of a therapeutic intervention. So in my health psychology class, for example, I ask people to engage in a stress relief project where they spend 2 weeks trying to reduce their stress, and they see whether that was effective or not. Now, you can say it made me feel better, but of course, data is always going to be a little bit more compelling, and you can actually measure it and compare it. So one of the things I ask people to do is to collect data and then to chart it, to take a look at changes compared to baseline. So that's the key. When you have a single person, there's of course always a limit to how good your experiment is, but you can compare it to baseline or control and see if there is a difference, taking into account that you will have some challenges with causation without that control group in place and without random assignment. And with a single person, there's only so much that you can infer, but it still can be, once again, a useful way to track changes in behavior when you implement some sort of therapeutic intervention. So for example, if you're trying to get a child to stop knocking their head against the wall if they're suffering from autism and they're engaging in behaviors that could be harmful. So you implement a therapeutic intervention in order to see if you can get them to cease that particular harmful behavior. Then what we can see is we can see whether that intervention led to a change in behavior. So here's an example where you have a baseline and then a treatment condition and then a return to baseline. This is known as an ABA design, where A is baseline, B is treatment, and A is a return to baseline. So for example, you might have some sort of intervention where you're consistently intervening in a certain way or presenting some sort of therapeutic method or reward, and then you remove it to take a look at the withdrawal behavior. You can see here that what the results tend to show is that there's a certain baseline level of correct homework problems, and then with the treatment of whatever sort of intervention is going on, whether it's a reward system or additional monitoring or having some playtime or some reward in addition to doing homework well, then you can see that the number of correct homework problems shoots up about halfway through the treatment process. And then once that particular intervention is removed, the number of correct homework problems shoots back down again to the baseline level. This would indicate or suggest fairly compellingly that the treatment did make a difference, that the behavior is different with the treatment than it is under the baseline conditions. It's a bit stronger to have an ABAB design. This would be where you take a look at baseline treatment. This is so you can see whether a reversal in behavior happens twice or if it just happens the once. If it happens the once, it might be a fluke. If it happens twice and you map it onto the intervention or treatment, then you can make a stronger argument that the treatment is the thing that led to change and not some sort of additional outside factor. And there's also ethical considerations. If the treatment helps improve outcomes, then it's better to end with a treatment rather than withdrawing it. So multiple baselines are when reversal or removal of treatment may be unethical or impossible given the nature of it. You're starting treatment for a particularly harmful behavior. You don't want to withdraw that treatment because if the harmful behavior continues, that could be very challenging for everyone and unethical. So when you have an inability to reverse or to revert back to baseline, then what you do is you do instead a comparison. So you vary implementation across participants or situations or behavior in order to see whether the implementation of the intervention triggers a change across a wide variety of people or situations or behaviors. So for example, you might have person A, person B, and person C who are engaged in smoking cessation, and you have a very specific therapeutic intervention that you implement for each of them, and you're able to track whether each of them experiences a shift in their behavior as a result of the therapeutic intervention. If each of them do, that strengthens your argument that the change is due to the therapeutic intervention. You could take a look at the same person across a variety of situations, or you could take a look at related behaviors and once again implement at different times in order to see whether the intervention leads to changes for each of those behaviors in turn. So you can vary the time of the implementation for each person, situation, or behavior to see if the change occurs after, to ensure that it's because of the implementation and not because of something that's happening in that person's life at that particular time. So here's an example of a smoking cessation program. You can see here we have the number of cigarettes, and then the dotted line represents the implementation of treatment, whether it's chewing nicotine gum or engaging in some form of therapy. Each of these people received a treatment, and each of them received it at different time frames. You can see one person received it at between week 3 and 4, another person started it between week 6 and 7, and another person started it between week 9 and 10. And you can see that all three of those subjects experienced a drop in their cigarette consumption, indicating that it didn't matter which week the treatment was implemented in, but the treatment itself had a compelling change in people's behavior. And once again, it's important to know this is limited in terms of the sorts of things you can say about it, but if you collect enough data, then it can present an empirical argument for behavior change even when you're dealing with a very limited number of people.